Hi, I'm your host, Jürgen Strauss from Innova.Buzz, and I'm really excited to welcome to the Innova.Buzz podcast today, all the way from Colorado Springs in the USA, Jason Croft, who's the brains behind Media Leads. Media Leads is transforming business growth using media lead generation. What does that mean? We'll learn today on the show. With his knack for precise interviews, Jason enables clients to speed up their sales cycles, to make a name for themselves in their industry, and to grow their business massively as a result. He also helps them build relationships with their clients and with other people through his system. So I'm really looking forward to digging into all those things. Welcome to the Innova.Buzz podcast, Jason. It's a real privilege to have another chat with you.
Yes, indeed. Thank you so much. Yeah, it was great to have you on strategy and action and just our other conversations we've had have been fantastic.
Yeah, wonderful. Now, Chris Michelle, who was our guest on episode 521 of the Innova.Buzz podcast, he introduced us and suggested that we get together. And we've kind of, as you've mentioned, I've appeared on your show, Strategy and Action. And we had a couple of really interesting conversations, both on the show and before that, and got lots of things in common, lots of crossover areas, and I've learned a lot already in speaking to you. So I'm looking forward to learning a lot more today. And a big hello to Chris.
Yes, indeed. So, I'm just curious, do you sort of call him out in the beginning so that, if this goes horribly wrong, like everyone
Yeah,
knows who to blame,
yeah,
like
yeah.
they can go after him?
That's right. Don't worry, Chris, this will be fine. All right. Now, one of the things that really fascinated me when Chris sent through the introduction and I had a look at who is Jason Croft, and one of the things you mentioned was connecting people is one of the things that really drives you. And I thought, wow, there's somebody after my own heart. And then when we had the conversation, it turns out we're both actually introverts, and yet you're a connector of people, and I like to connect people. So and of course, we both do podcasts and we both use podcasting, and in your case, probably more video than I do, as a sales tool, as a marketing tool, as a tool to actually impact your business, grow your business, and connect with people at the same time. So I'm really looking forward to exploring into all of those topics, digging into all of those topics, and getting your perspective on that, and hopefully add to my perspective. Now, before we do that, what's the impact you're making in the world today, Jason?
Oh my goodness. Hopefully it's connecting more people in terms of both connecting with them and connecting them to each other. That's the goal anyway, and connecting them to new ideas and all of that.
Yeah, yeah, it's wonderful. I was always into this networking thing and helping people, but at some point, I actually realized that most of the value in that was connecting people to somebody else. Hey, you have something in common with this person. I will introduce you and have a conversation with them, see what happens. That there's actually inherent value in that. It took me a long time to realize that there was inherent value in that, rather than looking for, is that a potential client for that person, or is that a potential supplier if they have a specific need? That was a big shift for me. I don't know how you see that.
Yeah, yeah, big time. For me, I tell the origin story of this love of connecting a lot of times around, reading Malcolm Gladwell's The Tipping Point.
Hmm.
And we need described, these three main types of people, and one of those is the connector, right? And for whatever reason, that just lit me up. I was like, oh, I want to be that, that
Yeah.
go-to person that everyone goes to when they're looking to connect with someone. And I was the furthest thing in the world from it, right? And I went on a mission to go and, how do I get better at this and go and do that? And I feel like I really have done that in a very purposeful way. And to your point, like that's the most fun. When I first started doing this, I kind of kept track of it, and of course that went by the wayside really quickly, but
Hmm.
kept track of who I introduced to who and what sort of came of it, or just because it was so enjoyable. Like I loved that. Like it was just a blast. So I'm right there with you.
Yeah, yeah. And as I mentioned, I mean, once I changed my mindset in, hey, if I introduce you, Jason, to somebody else that comes to mind in a conversation we have, there's value in that. It doesn't matter if nothing ever comes of the conversation you have with that person, there's still value in that. And so removing myself from the judgment of will you be able to do business with them, or will they be able to fill a need you have, removing myself from that judgment kind of opened up this whole new world.
Oh yeah. And to that's the fun part too. For me, I consider it a badge of honor to have those people in my life who
Hmm.
I don't have to ask to make an introduction to someone else. Like they've told me, like, don't skip that step.
Yeah,
Don't
yeah,
worry about that. If you're introducing me to them, there's a reason. So
yeah.
just let's go. And I think that is just it's that intention, like you talked about, of really just truly wanting to connect, but it's also just surrounding yourself with just amazing people and digging
Hmm.
in and certainly being discerning and who you would connect and have that proper judgment
Yeah,
of
yeah.
everything as well. And again, maybe discernment rather than judgment. It's a better
Yeah, yeah.
word. uh, but having like that's a wonderful reputation in my mind to have with folks.
Yeah, yeah. Well, certainly I can think of some people that I wouldn't want to introduce to anyone in my network, and yet they're in my world. So, what does that say?
Yeah, no judgment. We won't say.
Yeah,
Sometimes they're just circling around. Maybe you're
yeah,
you're
yeah,
slowly making that distance a little greater.
yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, it's well, we can get onto this, I suppose. It's always good to have people in your life that challenge you in whatever way it might be, because I think that's part of the learning journey.
Yeah, definitely. And that's a really powerful thing, and that's manifested itself a lot for me in the last few months of whether it's not necessarily even who they are, but what they're doing, maybe my feeling about the quality of what they're they're doing or putting
Hmm.
out in the world and all of that. But I think I've done a better job at standing back and going, okay, but what can I learn from this person? Here's how
Hmm.
I'm reacting, but what can I pull from that? What's
Yeah.
oh yeah, well, at least they're they've done it and they're two steps ahead of me, right?
Hmm.
Oh, that's powerful. I could take that away. What have they done? They've taken action and gotten this feedback, or you know, I don't like anything about this person except this one thing. Okay, that goes in the bank, right? Like,
Hmm.
okay, they've got this down.
Yeah.
you know, there's and if you can have that mindset going into things, certainly in situations in people with people and all of that, um, I think a powerful way to move through the world.
Hmm. Yeah. Absolutely. All right. Well, let's shift gears a little bit. Although it is closely related in the way we both tackle podcasting, but let's talk about podcasting as a sales tool and what what your process and systems are, and why podcasting is such a valuable tool in business in general.
Oh yeah. What I lead with the most, I'll kind of go down that road in a second, but one that I don't lead with that relates right to what we were just talking about is
Hmm.
it's the greatest network building tool
Yeah.
that I've found. That's for sure, on being able to reach out and connect with people. And
Hmm.
if you're intentional about networking and really building relationships, oh my goodness, it's the greatest thing in the world. um and that's been powerful. And I stumbled into this whole thing in terms of being in front of the camera, to 2015. And so these lessons I've learned from it are, you know you learn firsthand, but really sort of like, oh, these aha moments that
Mm.
come through. And what I do lead with in terms of when I encourage people to start a show, the reason why, uh, as a sales tool, I mean, it's the most powerful cold outreach
Mm.
mechanism that you can have. And instead of the typical podcasting, as content marketing approach, that's sort of like a default when somebody thinks about, oh, going and starting a podcast. Oh, I'll do that 6 months, a year, get some interest, build an audience. Eventually, something good will happen. Well,
Mm.
no, 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 no. The likelihood that you're going to stick to that for 6 months to a year,
Yeah, yeah.
if it's not benefiting your business, is very unlikely. But all of that stuff, that long term, those long term things, the network building things that I just talked about, all that is true and it happens. But you can construct your show in a way that it's immediately beneficial to your business. And some of those ways are, number one, who you bring on to your show as a guest, right? Who have you been trying to get as a client? Bring those folks on and have a conversation.
Mm.
Bring on strategic partners, people with an audience of your ideal clients.
Mm.
And when that intention is there, just like in a sales conversation, if that intention is truly, I just I just want a chance to have a conversation with this person,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
see if there's anything to us working together. It's just that first moment, that first piece. And when you can be intentional with that on who you bring onto your show, but then also make sure that your show is structured in a way that anybody listening or watching, they know what you do, they know how you help people, and they know how it could benefit them.
Mm.
And along with the content marketing sort of typical approach, what goes with that a lot of times is that fear of being, making an offer or being salesy or anything.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
if you're going through all this trouble, like have an ad for what you do, make it
Mm.
very clear, both sometimes in the structure of the show, in the interview, you can, I mean, if you're a coach and consultant on certain things, you can coach and consult that person on their lives
Yeah, that's
sometimes,
right. Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And at least little nuggets or pieces. And then, certainly have standalone, advertising and things like that. That's, again, it can all be done in such a fun, easy, natural way that doesn't come across as,
Mm.
salesy and hammering things home.
Yeah, yeah. That's lots of really great points there. And also, um, for me, having a conversation like this is just a natural thing. So it comes naturally, and as you say, you can naturally then bring into the conversation, hey, if the listeners are interested in finding out more about this service, here's where you go. And that's not a big sales pitch. It is a sales pitch, but it's not unnatural to me. Whereas if I were to send out cold emails or make cold phone calls and say, hey, are you interested in this service that I've got? And here's how you sign up for it. That would feel very unnatural to me. And of course, if it feels unnatural to me, then the person hearing or seeing that pitch says, this person's not genuine or not sincere.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Energy goes a long way in,
Mm.
it goes through, it goes across continents through these
Yeah,
mediums.
that's right. Yeah.
It goes through unspoken, emails sending out. I,
Yeah.
I agree with that wholeheartedly.
Mm. Yeah, you reminded me, and I can't recall now who this was on a podcast, but it was a business strategy coach who had a podcast, and he brought potential clients on, and his opening question was more or less, well, what are the issues you're having right now with your business? Well, tell us about the business. That was the first thing. You set the scene, set the background. Okay, what are the biggest issues you're having right now? And then he went into a half hour, 45-minute coaching session with that person. And it was quite impressive what he did. And it seemed like he was doing it more or less on the spur of the moment. It didn't like the gist I got was that there hadn't been any staging. There hadn't been a lot of upfront preparation. I mean, he probably researched the person, but he would not necessarily have been aware of what's the biggest issue that they then bring up when he asks that question. but he actually live on the show did the coaching session, and then they went on and structured the podcast as a kind of a conversation, published that, and then of course the person who was the guest went away with some information that was helpful to them. If they wanted to go deeper, they had the opportunity to contact the host of the podcast again and say, hey, can we kind of take this further, and what are my options now? So there's the sales conversation. And listeners who were potential clients who may have been very similar to this person who had the same issue said, wow, he's really good. I better get in touch with him to get help with that.
Yeah.
So I thought that's a really powerful model.
Oh, big time. And the more everybody's going to be on their the spectrum, right, of comfort level with doing that, combined with, how sensitive things are that they do, or, the service they do for folks. But to me, that's the model. Like I should structure my shows even more in that direction, in my opinion, because I think that's really strong. Again, when it comes back to intention, right? If the only reason you're there is just like, I'm going to make this sale and it's a horrible interview if this sale doesn't go through, like, again, you're going to feel that. But if that intention is really, again, just like a first coaching call, like that intention is, I'm going to give this person all kinds of value and maybe something will come of it later. Wow. I mean, that comes through. And now you've got this piece and maybe he's doing this, but to take this even further is, now you've got this full episode, maybe promotional pieces that you create from it. And you can not just hope that other people like your guest view that or hear it, but you can go DM 100 of them on LinkedIn with this clip. Hey, I know you're just like so-and-so, or it seems you are. I thought you might get some value from this, right? And now you're actually placing that in front of all these folks and being intentional with that process. And even if that guest knows, doesn't know, or in the middle of it, they're just like, oh, they probably want to sell me. Even if that guest feels that and assumes that, there's still value for them because they're still getting a chance to tell their story. They're getting to, have this spotlight shown on them, and it's a piece of content now they can go and put in front of their audience. So it's just benefits everybody. I love that he's doing that.
Yeah, lots of really strong points there. One of the things that I mentioned in the introduction, and I know you're very strong on this, is the skill of interviewing. We've actually banned the use of the word interviewing from our entire ecosystem because I say we're just going to have a conversation. Interview seems sort of very formal in that. I've listened to lots of podcasts. In fact, one of my favorite ways to prepare for interviews like this is to go and check what other shows my guests been on and listen back to a few of those interviews. And that to me helps me understand a lot more about how they show up on a podcast as a guest, what kind of topics they talk about. And I like to think that I want to ask some different questions. I want to kind of differentiate myself from if somebody's done 100 guest appearances and they've been asked the same kind of questions for 100 episodes. I want to kind of be remembered as the one that dug deeper into one of the topics or went somewhere that they hadn't been before. And if somebody says to me, oh, I'd never been asked that before, then I say, oh, yes. The other thing I've learned, though, is I get a sense of how good is the host, the podcast host. And sometimes I go, wow, I must listen to that podcast some more. That host is really good. And I take away some ideas from what the host did that can help me, that I learned from. Other times I think, oh, God, this is painful. I think
when they're reading their question.
Yeah.
And what did you?
Yeah. Oh, okay. Next question. And okay, thanks for that answer. Next question. But yeah, sometimes they're very early in their podcasting journey and say, okay, they're doing it, they're getting started, that's great. Occasionally there's one that have done several hundred episodes and I think, oh, this is painful. So my question to you, I guess, is the idea of interviewing as a skill or asking really good questions and having a really fantastic conversation with a guest as a skill. How do you approach that? How did you develop your skill?
Yeah, part of it came even before I was in front of the camera. I mean, I've been doing video, film, movies, all that fun stuff for 30 plus years. And so much of that content was me interviewing somebody off screen, kind of
Okay, yeah,
pulling
yeah.
out some of that. So there was a little bit of that leading into it before I sat in a chair and did it. Um, I think a natural curiosity, a conversational style, and I'm going to give you this approach not as even complimentary to myself, but this is just how I've approached it, right?
Mm,
I've never on any of the shows that I've done had the list of questions and this I want to make sure we cover this, and it just feels constraining and
mm,
strange to me to do that. I had one show from the one episode of the first show that I ever did that I kind of did that with, and it saved me because I was doing it in front of a live audience, and that track that second track that's always going in my head of as I'm listening with one track, the other track is going like, oh, that's a great point. Okay, we'll ask about this. Well, that was going,
yeah, yeah,
that
yeah.
was taken up by, oh, what's the audience doing? How are they feeling about this? What's the audience
Okay,
doing? And
yeah,
I
yeah.
was like, oh, that's fascinating. Thank goodness I have my my safety, you know. But I've really just jumped in, and how I structure my show now is around a core topic. So
Mm,
it's less about like, oh, tell me everything about your life and I'll just sit here.
yeah,
It's less about that and it's more, hey, let's have this discussion around this topic and let's get into it, right? Um and and that lends itself to my style, which is a very conversational style. And
mm,
I think that comes from, I don't know, maybe just having a lot of conversations, but very purposeful conversations, not just like, oh yeah, I can talk to people. We all have that sort of
mm,
like, well, it's just talking, right? And we may approach it that way, but I've been really purposeful about that connection with people and really understanding them and, listening and making sure they
mm,
feel listened to. And it's one of those skills in life that I find interesting and fascinating. So I learn more about it. So I think all of that kind of flows into it, where I think I'm lacking and have been over the years is, treating it like the amazing skill that it can be, and continuing to learn, like, even getting into the nuance, get better and get structured with it. I've got a good friend of mine who runs a really successful podcast, and it's great. And he asked me early on, his name's Julian Placino, Pathways to Success, fantastic show. He does an amazing job. And he asked me early on, he's like, so, tell me about your line of questioning and, the questions that I'm like, I don't really have any. I just
mm.
like start talking. And he's just like, what are you talking? Like, that is just, no,
Yeah.
but where he's so much better, and maybe it comes from like, well, I've got to have my safety net, or,
Mm,
maybe it comes from there, but I've been able to, to learn that lesson of preparation a little more, even if it doesn't come
yeah.
in the form of, hard and fast questions, just taking that approach of like you talked about doing, like taking that preparation of, I'm going to make sure
Mm,
I listen to these things. I'm going to purposefully not ask these because they've been asked 100 times, or, because I think interviewing is, I think it's one of those exponential skills, I call it. Like you can just, if you're good at it, you can apply it in
yeah.
so many areas of your life, beyond
Exactly. Yeah.
a
Mm,
show or something.
yeah. I have to put my hand up and say, in the early days of my podcast, I had it very carefully scripted, and um, and the other thing, I didn't listen back to them because I was very self-conscious about the sound of my own voice. And when I was doing video, I was also doing video in the early days, very self-conscious about what am I doing on camera there? I'm scratching my head, I'm poking in my nose or something. And so I wouldn't look back for the first probably 30 to 50 episodes even. And at some point, I decided, no, I must look at the episodes. I must kind of step back, get over myself, as my business coach likes to say, and look at what am I doing, what's working, what can I improve on. And so I started doing that. And in that, I came to realize that there were 3 or 4 episodes in the first 15 that I thought, wow, they're amazing. Whereas some of the others, I thought, oh, gee, that's a sort of a bit of a drag. And it was almost like, oh, I don't know whether I should keep doing this. But the others, they're amazing. Well, what's different about those? Well, they were people I knew beforehand. I'd had long-standing relationships with. So I'd got on those episodes. Whilst I had my script, I kind of more or less ignored the script, because it was, hey, nice to see you again and tell me what's happening. And it was a conversation between friends. So I thought, I've got to get this down to a conversation between friends. And that realization really just freed me up. And then I ditched the script. And as you say, the script, I realized that was so constraining. Now I can have this conversation. And you mentioned listening. To me, that's really the key thing. Well, 2 key things: the preparation. So I need to be prepared. I need to have a sense of where can this go. I usually have 3 to 5 bullet points. And often when I get to 5 bullet points in my preparation, I say, no, that's too many. Cut something out. What's my focus? So I try to get it down to 3 bullet points. They're the topics I'm going to go with, but that's all I've got. And then it's around, okay, so what have you said? I'm going to respond to that. I'm going to dig deeper or go broader, or that reminds me of this story, or do you have an example of that? Those kind of things. And yeah, you're right. It's sort of, it's just developing that skill. And to me, also having the confidence to know in myself that I can carry this conversation in a way that will make it interesting for the guest and for someone listening in later on.
Oh yeah, you bring up a few things there. I'm glad you sparked these thoughts too, because yes, listening, just beyond a shadow of a doubt. Because if I've been incredibly angry at a podcast host that I'm listening to, and the successful ones even, and like you mentioned, it's because of not listening. It's because, wow, I'm just enraptured in the guest and what they're about to get to. And then they're like, oh, yeah, that reminds me when I did this back in 19. I'm like, what are you doing? And then we never get there. We never get the end of that story. Oh, my goodness. That is beyond frustrating. But to your point of listening back, too, that's the one thing I did from episode 1 and forever, and every episode I've ever done, and that I kind of scream from the rafters to have people do, because it's the last thing you want to do for exactly the reasons you laid out.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to do it. I didn't want to do it. I couldn't stand the sound of my voice, how it looked, all of that. But it was the greatest learning tool that I learned and developed those skills that I've applied, again, way beyond a show, just how I communicate with somebody, in real life, standing across from them, just having a conversation, because of those times that I was just listening back to an episode, screaming at myself how bad it was, of just finish a sentence, man. Come on. And just being so frustrated, but it was great, because what you talked about, feeling about those 3 out of the 15 or whatever it was, that's what's so fascinating that people don't realize is going to happen, is you get outside of yourself after a few, and you realize you can be impartial. You can go, oh, that was really good. That was actually a fantastic conversation. That was really, and you can be critical where you're critical, but you get outside of this, just like, and
Yeah.
you really start, judging the content, on its own merit, if
Exactly.
you
Yeah.
will. Um, yeah, it was interesting too. The other thing I was going to say is interviewing your friends. That's been an interesting one for me, because I find it like maybe it's just a getting going when I do know the person really well and I'm having them on the show, and trying not to talk in shorthand or anything like that,
Mm.
to make sure that I'm getting the full picture there. That's been a little challenging when I've done that at times. So, the dynamic that it is makes a lot of sense, like you described.
Mm. Mm. Yeah. Well, a couple of those guests in those early episodes were people that I'd worked closely with in my corporate career. One was a customer, one was a former director of the business I was in. So he was kind of like my boss's boss. And they were both really good in the sense of they would reflect back on something that we both experienced together in our relationship in the past in the corporate world, to as a story to highlight the point they were making, but they would set the scenario. So they're actually thinking of, hey, there's an audience here that doesn't know what happened here. So they would kind of in 3 or 4 sentences set the scenario so that somebody else who wasn't present at whatever it was that happened had a bit of a sense of the context, and then they'd
Oh, that's great.
elaborate on the story. So that they were really good in that sense. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very helpful
Yeah.
to have that. Somebody's good and has that wherewithal, either because you better have it or they better have it. Like one,
Yes.
you know.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. Sometimes I find myself, let's step back and let's put that into context. Yeah. So again, listening, you have to listen and you have to be aware of there's people listening to this conversation that don't know what you and I have done in the past on some other platform or in some other um, event, whatever it might have been. Yeah. All
Yeah,
right.
absolutely.
You mentioned something a few moments ago, and I'd like to dig into this as well because I've certainly found it really helpful beyond just podcasting. Is the skill of having that conversation? How have you applied that in other situations or in other contexts?
Oh goodness. I mean, it's constant, I think, from whether I'm talking to my sons, or certainly in networking when we're not recording, especially as virtual virtual as we all are. A lot of those skills come through, in this format that you can apply in person, but knowing that there's this medium and having gone and watched these things back, you have a better sense of how you come across. So, okay, let me make sure that I'm phrasing things this way or clearly or pausing at the right time. So even in that context, it works really well. Certainly in a sales conversation, which most of my sales conversations are just conversations
Yeah,
anyway. By the time we're getting to that point. And again, all of these things just in life, and again, if you're sitting across from someone, developing those skills so that they not only do you hear them, but they feel like you've heard them, you
mm,
know, while they're talking, and then maybe in how you encapsulate or respond. Um, I just think it's constant in every interaction I'm having. I think there's a little piece of what I've developed in terms of having a show and so many conversations. I think these little pieces come out.
yeah. Wonderful. So there might have been a bit of rumbling in the background there and the noise. There's a bit of a heavy thunderstorm just hit here. So
Oh, I didn't hear it.
we will do our best to edit the background noise out if there is any background noise. But yeah, we'll continue. We'll push on. Wonderful. Well, I think just looking at the clock as well, and we've time flies when you're having fun, and this has been wonderful so far. So I think it's a good point now to move on to the buzz, which is our innovation round. And I've actually got this scripted in front of me, even though I know the questions now. um, so it's designed to help our listeners gain some really quick tips from your experience to hopefully have them go and do something awesome today as a result.
Nice.
Ready?
Ready.
Okay. What's the number one thing anyone needs to do to be more innovative?
Ooh. Yeah, I think it's having that healthy balance of taking in, right? Taking in that information, whether it's something that may not seem like related to them or their industry or anything, and really have that filter always going, especially in the times we're living in right now of like, okay, how could this either affect my industry or how could I use it to move the needle and affect my industry, right? I think that's just having that way of thinking about the world and being open and curious leads to innovation. Whereas if it's all defense, you're not gonna you're trying to maintain the status quo.
That's right. Yeah,
that doesn't work too well.
Yeah, I think it's being open, being curious, and looking across the fence into different fields as well. What can we learn from different fields that are unrelated?
Mm-hmm. That's hard to do at times. Like,
yeah,
especially when you love what you do in your industry, and it is all consuming because there's so much to learn, and it's really enjoyable. It's kind of hard to step out and go,
yeah.
Okay, what's the physics world doing right now?
Yeah.
And take that in. But wow, at the insights that can come from that.
Yeah, well, you talked about balance. So obviously you've got to find that balance with going really deep on this thing that I'm passionate about, and how can I become the expert in this? So I've got to learn everything about that. But at the same time, if you want to differentiate yourself, and I'm preempting another question, there's some lessons from physics or neuroscience. I love neuroscience is one that I'm delving into all the time. There's lessons from these fields that are seemingly unrelated that can be brought back into what you're doing.
Oh yeah, big time.
Yeah. All right. What's the best thing you've done to develop new ideas?
Oh, this is one I just started this back up again. But over the years, I got this from James Altucher. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, author and everything. So he's got his things that he promotes is doing like this list of 10, like just brainstorming 10 things, right? Like you pick whatever that is for the day, but just 10 off the top of your head things. And it's training that muscle. Kind of goes back to the first question too, but and how to be innovative, right? Of like, it's a muscle, to look at the world that way, to create new ideas and really stay in the habit of just newness and new ideas and keep that flowing.
Do you do that? Do you have some hook that you hook that onto when you do that 10 ideas
Meaning,
brainstorming? Well, for example, I had a guest on recently. We were talking about creativity, and her suggestion was pick something to focus on each day. So it might be the color yellow. So I'm just going to go the color yellow. I'm going to notice everything that's yellow, and I'm going to brainstorm around that. What does that bring up for me, as an example?
Oh yeah, mine's usually just on the day, right? It may relate to what I need to do. It may be content ideas. It may be, something that I need to create anyway. And sometimes it'll be just this is ridiculous. If I, was starting from scratch today, what are 10 things I could do if I threw everything in the trash and started, it may be just thought experiment style like that.
Okay, fantastic. All right, now, favorite resource you use most often?
Oh, I got a few of those. I don't know if I'm allowed to have multiples, but Evernote like crazy. Like my world's in there. Use that all the time because I'm a Mac user. And if you're not, I'm sorry for you. But Alfred is something I use on Mac, and it can do a whole bunch of things. But the biggest thing is the snippets, the text expander thing that it does.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Like I'm still giddy. I've been using it for years and I'm still giddy when I use it, when I can, punch in two keys and it's a paragraph of
Yeah, yeah,
content that I send 100 times. So I make it a, oh, that's fantastic.
yeah, yeah. I've always been envious of that. There's a couple of tools like, um, and that's one of them that Mac users have that weren't available on Windows. But probably about 3 or 4 months ago, there was one came up, and I can't even remember what it is now. It's just so integrated in my systems now. I think it might be a plugin for Chrome that does exactly the same thing. And all I do is hit Control Space, and up comes the window, and it's all there. Control Space and two keys, and up comes a paragraph of text. So it's replaced a lot of my like templates that I have to copy and paste in from somewhere if I'm going to send an email. For example, when I respond to a podcast pitch, I have a template that includes videos and everything, and that's all in this thing now. So it's 4 keystrokes, and I've sent the message.
Oh, yeah. And if you're not using it, people like you gotta find, there are
Yeah.
different ones out there for, yeah.
So here we are. We're back again after a doozy of a thunderstorm that took out my internet, and we've been kind of trying to communicate. My phone lines were down and everything, so we've been trying to communicate and get reconnected, and it's taken a couple of hours, but we're finally back. So in the middle of the buzz round. So the next
Yeah,
next
there's a big buzz. There's a big buzz right there.
Yep, that's right. Yeah. So the next question of the buzz round, Jason, is what's the best way to keep a project on track?
Ooh, yeah, a good project management system, having that that one place for everything, whether it's dealing with the client, dealing with, even if it's just you, having that one place to go, or you could say one system. Sometimes
Yeah.
if it's for your own stuff, you got to kind of piecemeal Google Drive stuff with Evernote maybe and all of that. I think that's where I've been living, as I transition into more of a project management. Here's everything. Um, a, a really good one, um, that's been helpful that I just started using is a with clients is called UpCoach. And so for coaches
Okay.
and consultants,
Hmm.
it's a great place. It's not a full project management, so it's not quite to think of it like that. But essentially, it's if you're going to have the course somewhere, all your materials, anything you want to give to a client, the tasks, the to dos, the very interactive, it's all in one place, and it's just laid out beautifully. Todd Herman, who, amazing coach and
Yeah.
author and
Hmm.
all of that. He's it's his baby that he's
Okay.
put out there, and it's really good.
Yeah, I'll have to check that one out. I don't know Up Coach. Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we've got a whole nother episode, obviously, on systems and systemizing what we do, because I know you have wonderful systems for your podcast as well. And I've experienced that as a podcast guest, and you're experiencing mine now.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. All right. Final question of the buzz. Took us a while to get through this one. What's the number one thing anyone can do to differentiate themselves?
Well, I'm certainly biased, but I'll say putting that content out there, putting video content
Hmm.
out there, and as much as we hear about it and we're hit over the head with it every day, to do video, it really is still a differentiator for folks who, there's a small percentage of folks who are actually doing it, especially in, let's say, the LinkedIn
Hmm.
ecosphere, right? Like in that world, who are actually doing it, and then an even smaller percentage that are doing it well.
Yeah.
And by doing it well, I don't just mean, it's a nice image and they're saying some interesting things, but really how, I teach people and guide them through is to create leadership level content, right? Have
Hmm.
that, really moving the conversation forward, their industry forward, having some way to express their unique IP, their unique way of doing things, and teaching and educating through that lens, and really looking for those ways to your point, differentiate. And I think that's the
Hmm.
the big missing piece
Yeah.
again, especially on LinkedIn. There's a lot of "you should try your best every day," kind of quote out
Yeah.
there,
Yeah. Yeah.
and just like,
Just
okay,
the platitudes. Yeah, I call them.
yeah,
Hmm.
exactly. And so,
Yeah.
and find those things that that you can take a stand on. And I think
Hmm.
when we hear that, our minds immediately go to the people who try to just, are triggering, or they're just so
Hmm.
extreme, or, and it doesn't have to be that crazy of an idea. But
No, it doesn't. Hmm.
yeah, but like, think about things that, that most people consider just truth and normal for your industry, that you just really disagree with because
Hmm.
you've seen it work better differently. And it doesn't have to be these wild, crazy, hot topic kind of things out in the world.
Hmm.
You can really stand in your own truth within your industry. I mean, even what I talked about earlier in the episode, many hours ago. But like it, with podcasting, I'll be in
Hmm.
groups right now as somebody's talking, teaching, and saying, well, with podcasting, that don't, if you need money today, don't just you know um, jump in and start a podcast, because that's something that's you're not gonna see benefits of that till
Hmm.
a year down the road. And that's something, as I mentioned earlier, like, I stand against that, and I'm like, oh,
Yeah. Yeah.
hang on. So find those things, and those are the points of differentiation for sure.
Absolutely. And as we were chatting about many hours ago, the idea of developing that skill of having a conversation on a podcast and having that conversation and drawing information out of the guest can be applied to so many other things that you can immediately monetize, right? So there's not just using your system for podcasting as a sales tool and as a lead generating tool, but there's skills that you develop from that you can immediately apply in other areas and monetize those areas.
Oh yeah, and I mean, think about that, of being, a resource for, it's kind of the reporter model, they call it too. You could
Hmm,
be that resource of, if it's not your own IP, like, you find that, um,
exactly.
all those best methodologies that are out there. And again, I think, we hear this stuff and we think about it immediately to what is in front of us, which is, maybe the big boys. Immediately,
Hmm,
somebody gives the example of, like, like Oprah, and you go,
yeah, yeah.
okay, and that just, it
Yeah,
immediately, there's that separation. But
that's right. Yeah.
think of think about, like, the manufacturing sector. Like, who owns the podcasting or video
Hmm,
space in industrial manufacturing in Iowa, right?
hmm,
Who know, like, how quickly you can dominate an industry and be the thought leader if you sell insurance to those folks, and how
hmm,
many, conversations, to your point, that you can go in and have by being curious and educating, and being a source of, hey, let's bring this industry together. You get to stand out really fast.
hmm. Wonderful. All right. Well, thanks for getting us through the buzz round. It's been a bit of a perilous journey, but we've gotten there. And I've really enjoyed the conversation so far. Now, where can people find out more about you and Media Leads Generation, get a hold of the podcast to listen into, and maybe even reach out and say thanks for what you've shared today?
Absolutely. The best place is thejasоncroft.com, because that's a little hub there that'll take you
Hmm.
to the Media Lead site and the shows I have going on. And if I've started two more shows by the time this comes out, like, those will be there too. So
Excellent. You'll keep that updated. All right. We'll obviously have that link in the show notes for people to click straight through. So, finally, Jason, what action would you like our listener to take out of today's conversation?
I would love for anyone who's not doing it, throw themselves out there a little bit, and just pick up their phone, have that have those practice
Yeah.
videos going on, and really discover the the power of this medium. uh Certainly, on creating videos, creating solo content is strong, but if you're just one of those great connectors and networkers, make that first little leap over to, doing it in public a little bit,
Mm.
even if it's audio only podcast, it's simple to start at times and to at least have those first couple going.
Mm, exactly. And it might just be as simple as yesterday I had a coffee meeting with somebody and we were just kind of comparing notes on various things that both of us were doing, recording that conversation. We could have recorded
Yeah.
that. We could have edited out some of the more personal stuff that perhaps you're not comfortable sharing, and there's a podcast episode already.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm. All right. Well, thanks, Jason. I've really enjoyed our conversation today. Look forward to the next one. There's plenty of little hooks there along the way that I thought we could probably do another whole episode on this. I've really enjoyed it, and please do stay in touch.
I certainly will. Thank you so much for having me on. It's been a blast.